welcome to the Three Beards podcast. My name's Craig, along with Austin and Chris.
Passed to a new generation of Americans born in this century.
Let me out.
I'm afraid that is white.
Then live to send the innocent to their death? Is this justice and honor in Massachusetts colony?
Well, everybody, how are we doing tonight? That was our new intro, so hopefully everybody enjoyed that one. So we just rolled that out. So Jared Murphy is joining us this time. This accomplished, I mean, it's an honor to have him on our show, just based off of the long list of places that he's been welcomed on as a guest and been shown on. You can also find him at conflictradio.net. You can go there where they have a really good show. He's also published, he's been published. The book that we're going to be talking about tonight is It's Not Aliens, Worse, It's Us. And so we're going to be talking about that one. Jared, welcome to the show. You just got done with archaeological research in South Africa.
Yeah, that was right before the sci-fi novel started. Yes, I spent the month of January in South Africa at Waterval Boven, looking at all the thousands of kilometers of literally they're just there, droning and walking lands, and it's an incredible amount of ruins that no one's really studying. They got written off for being just colonial pens, foundations, but they're not. It's pretty extensive, pretty cool.
Everybody, before I forget, I'm bad at this part. Go to notaliens.com is his website, and you can also, you can go to Amazon and purchase a book there. You can also go to notaliens.com and get a signed copy of his book, as well as get more information and see upcoming shows that he's going to be on, in areas where you can also watch and get more information about him and his work. So we'll get right into this one. I want to just say, I was trying to figure out where I wanted how to start off this conversation.
Yeah,
I've listened to a couple interviews with you, and I would say one of the quotes that I really, really liked from you was how when you explain to people that are trying to figure this thing out, because the basis, as I took it, the basis of this is everybody, History Channel, we'll name drop a little bit. They want everything. Pyramids are made by the aliens, alien ship. These are alien spaceports, but the way you phrased it, and I'll just say this and I'll let you take the reins here, is that there was the comparison of the Hindu tradition, that there was a conflict between the gods.
Yeah.
And where you said, and then you also compared that with modern day, to where you have Amazon tribes, and there's that infamous tribe in the Pacific where nobody can get to them. What do they think when a helicopter, or a plane goes over, or this big ship, that they've never seen before? I mean, what they depict, wouldn't that be the same thing that we see in the Sumerian texts, where it shows the guy in the jar, the clay jar with a figure? And that's what I said, and I'll go from there, and I'll let you take it, the realms on that one.
Well, thanks for having me on. This is great. The site, notaliens.com, like you said, I will not just send you a signed book. I actually sign the books and go and mail them. So they are there's not a pile of signed books that I'm hoping correspond with you buying one, which is I think some people dig. But for the yeah, and so that there's so much confusion on technology, the way like all of us have these backgrounds, all of us are on different mics, and we can see different technology, and everyone listening is doing it on some technology that we look at as technology. We are barely scratching the surface of understanding biotech, like writing information on genes. In 2008, Harvard scientists actually put a 50,000 word book on just using our genome sequencing as ones and zeros, and 12 years later they can throw a terabyte of information on a gram of DNA. So you can basically take everything humans know, and throw it on 2 elephants. And mind you, it's not like an elephant's walking around going, "I'm hungry, but all I think about is E equals MC squared." They're still elephants. They're just being elephants, but what we think of a lot of times as stored memories or stored. So this is just, before I dive into it, it's just one aspect of technology where we are still discovering 3.5. Michael Cremo talks about this in Forbidden Archaeology, which is a great foundational pillar for some of the work I went into, because the minute we started taking archaeology seriously, we found that there's anatomically correct humans in layers of earth that don't correspond with the story we were told. So then we're like, okay, we got that wrong, and maybe Earth is older. But then we always look at ourselves now and say we're the most technologically advanced as we've ever been. Yet every ancient ruin around Earth. So we have polygonal masonry, which are the intricate blocks all over the planet. We have engineered soil called terra preta. That's not just in Brazil, but it's in North Africa and Australia. But we also have different kinds of biochars, which are in all across the world. We have, basically, if we're building a story to say, what are the facts on the table? The facts are not aliens. The facts aren't that there aren't high-tech ancient ancestors still flying around, which is where we're going to go with what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. I'm saying that it would be just as easy for the tribes that we leave alone today, like the Sengalis that speared that guy who decided he was going to go to the Sengalis and teach them. Even Marco Polo went to that island, and like, these people are savages. Do not ever come back to this island. He actually wrote that. Awesome. Yes. And it's like, just leave them alone. And that guy comes anyway, and he's like, I'm gonna bring them. It's like, you're gonna bring them is what every conquistador and missionary has brought before. Disease. Yeah, Forbidden Archaeology. That book, a lot of people don't know about that book is that, one, Michael Cremo has an incredible sense of humor. It's really dry, crap load of info, but his sense of humor is incredible. That book has a whole section on everything known about Bigfoot and Sasquatch in the most scientific way, which often doesn't get brought up, and a whole section about the Rockefeller Foundation and how their intent to use data about humans from the past for sociological reasons. And I'll leave it at that for the show. But it's super interesting, because what we find is that nothing about the story we were told about our past. It's like, okay, well, it's a different story. But then we have these ruins like the Great Pyramid, Machu Picchu, Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, Tiwanaku, all over Angkor Wat, Easter Island. They're like, oh yeah, those giant heads. Yeah, okay. Oh, did you know they have bodies? Well, that's neat. Did you know that there's 150 of the 1,000-ish moai that are made out of basalt, which is the oldest and hardest and the most complexly finished moai, and they're the oldest. But then later, I didn't know that. Yeah, and then later you have the dynastic Egyptians. Again, what are they? They come in. There's a bunch of ruins, ready-made society. Start moving. And then same thing, Aztecs, Mayans, Olmecs, Toltecs, fill in the blank. You have societies coming in where there's basically a wrecked ruin prior megalithic constructions, which is all that would be left after thousands of years. And then when you start reconstructing the technology to not only build the structures, but then we hear that there's this self-propagating, and we can get into it, but terra preta, this engineered soil, it has piezoelectric properties. It filters heavy metals. It filters carbon dioxide. And it's the richest growing soil. And for 100 years, soil scientists have been looking at it. And they've made modern biochars. So like if we're going to go have an apple orchard, you would be like, well, we want this combo of a biochar, which is you burn some organics and biomass and you end up getting a combo in the soil that helps be richer and better for growing. But this soil is much more complex. And not only that, something that no one's looked at that I've been screaming about now is, besides all the genetic technology, the issue is, what are we doing with, I have a background in historical remodeling. I've done restoration remodeling for 20 years. And when I look at constructions and have to do structural add-ons and et cetera, and foundational work, I have a different look at it than an archaeologist or an anthropologist. I look at it as someone who builds buildings. And when you look at these buildings, the first thing I ask now is, along with this engineered soil and these polygonal blocks that are shaped to either maybe mute earthquakes or also have maybe those piezoelectric qualities to connect to that soil, what's under the buildings? So to really dig into it, we have a society that can look at this point. We're going to build a building or a whole metropolis, and underground and 4 miles this way, there's a plate that's either rubbing together, flapping on itself, pushing up, and causing an earthquake that's going to cause a particular wave and frequency that's going to cause this set of buildings to have these polygonal shapes. And then when you look at that society, and not that they're cutting big blocks and moving them like at Tiwanaku, almost 13,500 feet in the air from like 75 miles away, not exactly like up an elevator, literally across mountains, and or at Aswan, like in Egypt, you have quarrying going on thousands of miles away, but it's not like they're making big giant square blocks. And we've already heard a lot from a lot of people about, well, we have 3 cranes in the world that could lift up at Baalbek, Lebanon. We could lift up like 1,200 tons. There's a 900 and 1,200 ton stone that we could lift it up, and we could probably put it down, but we can't actually bring it anywhere, right? So you have to just think about all the other technologies involved. And then we think, well, they just got really good at either moving blocks and nothing else, or they also had those technologies for genes, genetics, and like we go in for plastic surgery. If you have full command of the human genome because you program it and you engineer soil, how hard is it for you to say, well, I want to have a tic-tac alien spacecraft? Well, we're going to call it not alien. We're going to say, I want a craft that can do 0-point turns at Mach 30, but I also don't want to be a melted puddle of goo. So maybe if I'm translucent, short, have onboard ocular infrared eye display, just like the thought command controls for weapon systems for F-18s and F-22s, maybe I wouldn't look like I do now. It's not that I'm not human. It's not that I've evolved. I have programmed myself to look like what you're going to say is an alien. That's kind of the opener for the book, kind of.
Yeah, and I wonder, kind of like real quick, before we got too far away from it, when you were talking about the DNA, putting all that information in there, I've often wondered that, because one of the theories is that the Noah's Ark wasn't literally a wooden boat that 2 of every animal came from the entire world, walked over here, loaded up in the boat, and they sailed away in the flood. That it was more of a DNA information depository, and this could have been something, like you said, the Ark could have been something. Way you're talking, it could have been this. Could have been the size of this that they put inside some vessel that they buried, and that was what they called the Ark. But at that time, nobody's going to understand this complex machinery thing. It's, as the story goes, it's like we put on this vessel, and to them vessels are, and that's where I went through there. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so there's a couple things to unpack about that. One is, this is one of our challenges in deconstructing and reconstructing our past. One is, like, I grew up Catholic, and the deal is, we look at post-Diluvian. All of us are now pretty sure that the Younger Dryas happened, that somewhere between 11.5 and 13,000 years ago, either a massive natural cataclysm and or some people think it, we're leaning on solar flares. That's one option. Dr. Robert Schoch, that's one option. There's an idea of hydrostatic plate shifting, where all these giant plates of the earth, like a lot of the water on the earth got under them, and eventually there was a bursting point. That's up there. There's another theory about that. But then we know that we've gone through multiple disasters. There's a massive crater impact site at the south tip of India. There's the Yucatan, which everybody thinks was the dinosaur killer for the longest time. Me growing up, it was like, oh wow, all of Mexico's was a massive crater. And now we know, just from last year, we have the impact crater in Greenland. So first what we do is we put a story on our past and we say it's biblical, and we say, well, we know that this happened, and it's like, okay, but we're in the West, so here's what we do. Everything happened in the Garden of Eden or in Africa, because when we started creating theories, well, we know that out of Africa is where everything started. Okay, but the Hindu Vedas are older and describe millions of years of human existence, and yet we're Western. So we'll talk all day long about the Greeks, and we'll talk all the way through the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, and we get to where we are. So the first thing we do is all the religions on earth have a flood story, but that's the flood from Younger Dryas. Then we have cities, like there's a pyramid city that I talk about in the first couple chapters of my book that's off the coast of Cuba that they found when they were looking for gold 14 years ago. And that city looks like it's polygonal, looks like a pyramid city, but it's 2,300 feet deep. The last time that was above water would have been about 50,000 years ago. And it's not like they built it and said, okay, we're ready for the flood. And that would have been a flood 50,000 years ago. And that's not the only location. Very far off the coast of India, there's sites across from Japan. The story is, what's interesting is that the story of these societies are, we have this Younger Dryas period, but we also have a massive cataclysm at least 50, 60,000 years ago, that window. And so when was the last time a global civilization existed versus post 50,000 years ago? We get to the Younger Dryas, and we know from Solon, the Greek, talking to the Egyptians, hey, you Greeks are very old. Eric von Daniken goes on about this, and he's like, you Greeks are very old. You're young now, but you're actually very old. You're a very advanced society. And we ourselves, the Egyptians, we have a dynastic kings list that goes 36,000 years. And everyone's like, well, they knew all about the stars and Orion, but they don't know, and they know about the precession of the stars, but shit, they don't know what they're talking about past 20,000 years ago, right? So they made it up. Just like the Sumerians, the country of Sumer made the kings list where they have 8 kings. They literally have multiple kings lists found everywhere that say, oh, well, we have pre-flood kings, and we have 8 of them, and they each ruled for 32,000 years. We also used pi to figure out ziggurats. We had the Babylonian Plimpton tablet, which is math that is given to Pythagoras 1,000 years later, but we already have it. And we have the base 60 math system, which is all about spherical geometrical math, and we have that in a tablet. But yeah, we don't know what years are, and it's allegorical that they live 32,000 years apiece. So when it comes to the DNA sequencing and the arc, and is it possible? First, we have to separate ourselves from all of our, your religion and your faith are separate things. You can have those, but what makes people difficult to comprehend where we are with our history is that you have to take out the legends and myths and stories so that you can look at, well, what is the truth of the technologies? Is it realistic? You remember the Gary Larson Far Side where Noah's letting everyone on the ark, and then the dinosaurs miss it.
That was today. I thought that was tomorrow. Yeah, as it's sailing away. Yeah.
It's like, so it's like, is it realistic to have DNA sequencing? Yeah. Is the Book of Enoch referenced by? If we go biblical, we could have we might as well have a 10, 20 part series, endless.
Oh yeah.
Like the Book of Enoch describes, that's Eric von Daniken's base for us having this momentum in the last 50 years. You literally have Enoch being picked up by God off the planet. He leaves the planet. He does not die. He describes, I'm looking at the planet. He's literally in a spaceship, and the Ethiopians still have it. The Book of Enoch is still in. It's considered a Gnostic text. It's out of the other. It's like, we can't have space travel. Let's take that out. People don't understand the political. It's a political book, and so it's like, we can't have this guy in space, and yet he's referenced by Jesus. He's referenced by all these other people and whatever. And so now. The DNA sequencing thing is what's interesting about what you're saying is also people have memories. Frequently they're Cleopatra. They're not Bill the poop scooper at the ancient Roman zoo, right? They're always Cleopatra or Mark Antony. It's like, no, I really feel connected to cows, and I was on a farm, and some people do come up with that story, and in some regressive and paranormal therapies, it does come up, and then it has been proven out. But the question is, we know that there's a collective human consciousness, and we could get into the specifics of that. But the issue is, do we remember our life? Is it possible, because we've proven this now scientifically, that traumatic memories can be passed? We've actually proven it in worms. The details of
Butterflies
which
too.
yeah, and so if we can transfer memories, and if we can actually remember, like right now it's instinctive. Why do we run up stairs that are dark, right? But we have memories that are specific. Now, is it just that it's a memory of an instinct for our benefit? Is it possible that as a collective human consciousness, we have a collective RAM that we tap into, that we actually are part of, and are actually each other's backups? So those junk genes are actually part of a complex zip sequencing. So when you think back and you think, oh, in this past life, I was this person, is it possible that based on your gene expression and your physical fitness and how you're programmed and where you're at, that your ability to access a memory might to you seem, I've had a paranormal experience, or I've had a past life? But what if it's just the way we're using to describe our experience with the Blinky board? And in reality, it's at 10 to 15% consciousness now. We're mistaking abilities like synesthesia, which connects to all 5 senses, and that's trippy. But is it possible that these memories are actually stored consciousness? That's a possibility, that we're not actually remembering our own past life. It's possibly that we are part of a collective backup, like a RAID array on a multi-disk computer, right? One disk fails, they can all fill each other in. But the idea is that we have this arc. That's the original question and concept, is that did we back up animals? And here's what's trippy. You brought up forbidden archaeology. You brought up the book. Michael Cremo is the first person to put on my radar that, do you know that we discover 3.5 to almost 5,000 species a year for like 40 years? We've been at it.
Wow.
So not just that little microorganism that we just figured out is literally not a oxygen breather, but we figure bats, fish, things that are not small, things that we thought were extinct. We discovered a lot of them. Yeah, a lot of them are bacteria and fungus, but a lot of them are animals. And we're like, yeah, we're killing the planet. It's like, well, I'd love to open up the book where it said we're supposed to have 50 billion mosquitoes, 8,000 mastodon, and 400 million people. You know, where's that manual? Anyone? And so it's the amount of the amount of hubris it takes to go, well, there's too many people on the planet. And it's like, well, when there was 500 million, Michelangelo thought of corkscrew planes with wood. We have 8 billion on the people, and you devalue people who don't, like, we've always had tribal people. Like there's always there's 150 plus tribes like those Sengalis that if we get wiped out and all of our crap's gone, there's still going to be campfires that say, oh, there's Aeolus and Neoliths, and these people are living very primitively and they weren't very advanced. No, there's always been those people. However, maybe something super bad happened, not at Younger Dryas, but maybe something really bad happened 50, 60,000 years ago that finally ended it for a global advanced human society, where they're like, they go into the bunkers, they come out, and all these native peoples have mimicked and taken over their sites, and they're like, well, there's not enough of us to take it all back over. Not to mention the fact that we're still trying to find everything that we left on the surface when we got nuked. So why don't we call it Atlantis? Or why don't we collectively back ourselves further away from the primitives that, gosh, we left great-great-great-grandma on the surface, and now look at her. She's eating the animals she used to talk to. Crap.
Yeah. She's got 7 legs. I don't understand this.
Right. It's like, oh shit, I feel really bad about that. And then it's like, well, let's interfere every now and then. It's like, yeah, Bill, the last time you gave them religion, they killed 40 million people. Shut up, Bill. And they're like, it's like,
what's that? Yeah, there's that there where it was in college. I learned this one, and it was, so I was surprised by that the professor said this. He goes, unfortunately, half the time the environmental fix is worse than the problem we're trying to fix. And he gave the example. I'm gonna forget the name of the island, but he had one. They had an insect problem, so they introduced mice and rodents. Well, now the rodents overrun the island, and so now they have to get rid of the rodents. So they bring in cats, and now these cats are overrunning the island. And it's like every time they do this environmental fix, it makes the problem even worse.
That's like That's like the mosquito thing. We got love bugs to get rid of mosquitoes, but they don't even eat mosquitoes. They're just an annoying bug.
Yeah. There's this academic. It's not just that. It's like I have a problem with those Georgia. Not a problem. I don't know the artist, but those Georgia stones, those standing stones,
The guide stones.
It's like I had not. It had not been on my radar a long time, but I got really mad when it said, make sure in the future you never have more than 500 million people. I'm like, great. If you want us to live in the fucking Renaissance forever,
no, you're good.
It's like, that's great. It's like,
we're off the air now. Oh no, I'm just messing with you.
Oh no, we lost Chris.
Yeah.
But that's the problem is that we can't. Again, find me the manual that said, well, when there's only 500 million people, will the mastodons come back? Are you going to get T-Rexes? Is the spotted small North America, by the way, the North American camel, the camels from North America, something happened. The Younger Dryas wiped out. We had leopards. We had the giant bear, which looked terrifying based on skeletal, but we had this total wipeout in North America during the Younger Dryas. And now that's just one snapshot. It doesn't explain all the other stuff that is everywhere that indicates a much more advanced human society. And when you start with the society, again, stone spheres, David Hatcher Childress, everyone, stone spheres, they're everywhere. They're in Russia. They're in the Arctic. They're in China. They're all over, San Fran. One of the things he likes to point out was, I saw it in one of his lectures where, hey, they start building trolleys and they start finding stone balls and they think that they're dinosaur eggs. And then they're in New Zealand. And for a while, they're in Bosnia. There's one in Bosnia near the Samir Osmanagic's work. There is a stone sphere that is 64 tons. And
I was gonna say that's massive. It is.
Yeah. And the thing is, they're really well hewn, and a lot of what gets on one level, it's really interesting to find out that they're not perfectly round. Is that due to them being in the ground for thousands of years? Is it due to somebody reshaping it? But then they're also hollow. And then one of the theories was that they were concretions, that they were just made for a period of time. It became trendy for volcanoes to roll dust and murky lava in the air and create essentially like a snowball, a concretion. And so for a while, volcanoes threw up and then made these stone spheres. That's the legit, that's the legit theory. That's what they think. I haven't seen a volcano. I mean, Mount St. Helens didn't do that. But
I was gonna say, with all the ones we've had, lately, it's like, show me at least one that's the size of this bottle cap. I mean, show me something where it's a perfect, almost a perfect sphere. And it's like,
well, if you're a highly tuned frequency-based society that can manage and control, like the pyramid system, the idea of the Giza power plant, like Christopher Dunn, and you're managing the ionosphere, do you know that in Costa Rica, and I have a whole bunch of the original black and white photos, in Costa Rica, they start finding these stone spheres. They also hear some locals find out that there might be treasure in them. So in various places around the world, they've been blown up. They've been drilled in and blown up, and they've found that they're hollow. So here's the thing. It doesn't matter if they're perfectly round, because I was able to get, and I mentioned them in my book, there is some papers written by some guys that are only looking into modern seismic metamaterials. And seismic metamaterials are anything from nano-sized particles to any kind of a shaped object that you either put under a single building or, i.e., multiple buildings like a stone sphere. And what they found was they experimented with 1 by 1 meter concrete stone spheres. They even cut them in quarters and put them back together with steel tubes. And they found that stone spheres, whether the concrete ones that they're using or these ones that are all over the earth, they found that stone spheres act as wave resignators. And if you place stone spheres, they literally have a diagram of piles of stone spheres under a hypothetical city, which they even point out not to scale. And like, start digging. We need stone spheres. Put them under the city. But they do all this research that
go find a sick volcano.
Yeah, well, right. And so they figured out that the stone spheres also act as this not only a muter to multiple buildings above them, but they also act as a wave resonator where they're also capable of transmuting or moving other signals. If you have a piezoelectric soil or a soil system, and we already know simple basic things that because we're at 10 to 15%. I mean, we're really operating at minimums right now, aren't we? But you get out on your feet. We already know from like Born to Run by Christopher McDougall, we already know that there's a ton of science on, there's an actual electron discharge. I would say that we're more frequency, we're more, it's a magnetic based thing. I don't believe in the particle itself. It's a theoretical. I think it's J.J. Thomson that came up, even theorized. He didn't actually call it a particle, not to nitpick, but a shout out for Ken Wheeler, who I think has done brilliant work. And the reality is that the electron, the idea of us exchanging a field connectivity to the earth is a real thing, whether it's an actual electron or a measurement of dielectricity or part of that system. I mean, that's the point, but it's relevant for a society that's measuring and managing all these frequencies and waves and understands what we are, understands how we connect with the earth. Again, if you take apart certain things in the Bible, it's like we used to talk to animals, and then the flood happened, and then it's a free-for-all, it's said, in a higher sense. Just like Ted Nugent, just eat everything, forget your buddy, the kitty, look over there.
Yeah.
Someone's dinner. That's what happened. But still, then we have these stories of longevities, right? Like, so the kings of Sumer post-flood in their world, their ages start decrementing. And same thing in the Bible, right? So we have similar myths, and much of it can be taken. You could say, okay, well, the oldest culture we know is Sumer, and their flood myth is identical to ours, and there's a Noah, and there's this, but there's decrementing of ages. Now, if you go back to that 50, 60,000 year mark, you can also start to see, okay, well, if it's a worldwide global pyramid power plant system that's also managing some frequencies and energies, is it possible that as it decrements, the reality is that, is it possible that our ages started decrementing down? Did we start losing that longevity? Was it just a nature of the system shutting down? That's like, that could be the sliver of the clue of what we should be looking at. But we're so obsessed with managing our expectations. Meanwhile, we have the hairpin. We have things that we're finding in India where we're like, oh, there's a major society that really knows how to coordinate directions. And again, you get places like Gobekli Tepe where, okay, I read about it 3 years. It's 4 years ago. I'm going to start my research. I don't know what I'm going to keep or not keep, but I hear about Gobekli Tepe. I hear about Klaus Schmidt. I hear that they found organics there. Find me on the internet now. They said that they had done carbon dating to over 36,000 years, and that it could be at least 12,000 years old. And now there's this vernacular, this dialogue, this paradigm that says, when people talk about Gobekli Tepe now, they're like, well, it's around 12 to 16,000 years old. And I'm like, what happened to those organic? I should have screenshotted it. Here's a lesson for everyone watching. If you find something, screenshot it.
Yeah. Oh. I've got that. I've one of those, just a little, thing. I saw it. It's a plaque on it was one of the observatories down in Antarctica. And it said, for observation of the enemy. And so, and it was one of those, and I can't find it now. It's like I said, it's one of those, was this Mandela effect? And, who knows what it was. But the other one, you kind of brought it up, and I want to say, tell me if I'm wrong or not, but I think in one interview listened to, you brought up that a skeleton was found and it still had intact organic material.
Yeah, Nassim Herman, I was talking to him, and I was talking to him, and I think it was on a trip with him, and I just talked to Brad Olson, and he and Brian Forrester, they're looking at the Paracas. So originally, I wanted to write fiction, and I wanted it to be about the oldest mummies on Earth that militaries would go find. They would reanimate those mummies and try to find old, ancient, high technology. I thought that would be the premise for the book. It was
sounds
day
like a good
2.
book. Make that happen.
Yeah. Thanks. All right.
Make that out. That actually sounds like a pretty cool book. I don't let that dream die. Don't let it die.
Yeah, okay, please. Maybe I should write the fiction alongside the nonfiction now, because it was day 2 that I'm looking for stuff on the Paracas. These are the Paracas of Peru. They have these elongated skulls. They have a different suture line. These people are genetically different. All we have to do is have this conversation. and some young paleoanthropologist, somebody who's not being indoctrinated into the archaeo-priesthood of archaeology. And the joke is that archaeology, and the opinion of it, changes at the rate of the death of one archaeologist at a time.
I love that joke. I love that one.
I know. And so here we are with mummies in Peru that, because of the arid nature of the area, first it was said, oh, they're just naturally preserved, and then there's intent behind the preservations also. But in Peru, the Pracus have these elongated skulls. They look like aliens, but the reality, well, they look alien to us, but they're humans. And Brian Forster wanted to do some genetic testing, and I'm sitting with Nassim. This is a direct conversation with him. And he goes, look, I saw ocular tissue, Jared. I had brain matter and ocular nerve tissue. It was soft tissue. And he goes, you should not have soft tissue after 3,000 years. And this mummy was almost 3,000 years old. So one could even argue that the
Absolutely not.
Right? But the programming, remember, all of our genes and DNA, like one of the best things you could pick up to really get your head around how much we could program and change all this is Ray Kurzweil, the founder of Google University, he wrote a book called The Singularity is Near. Mm-hmm. And it's really relevant. It was written, it's published in 2008, but he goes, it's 600 pages of everything from, we had nano factories that we could create nanobots that were 80 to 150 atoms in size. That was something we could do pre-2008. So then so a little nano factory that's 80 to 150 atoms could then pump out other little nanobots. We could do that 12 years ago. I saw a map of the world. I wish I should have had it for the show, but there's a map of the world made on 18 hydrogen atoms. And so our control of the universe is getting down. So our idea of genes and their storage or their management capability. So like, why, if you had a longer lifespan, wouldn't you have more durable genetic tissue? So perhaps the reason that these Paracas and the soft tissue isn't just a matter of being in the right drying conditions or the right storage conditions. What if it's also I'm just bringing it up for food for thought along with the point, which is that maybe the Paracas were also built of a better genome, just the genome is a better structure, because where their neck goes into their head, different than us. They have a missing suture line, and they have where the arteries go into the head to just the arterial, the foramen magnum are not the same as ours. But any college, if you had some guts, test them. We already know that there's bloodlines in South America that don't add up, and there's elongated skulls all over the earth, and there's different kinds. And based on Brian's work, and I don't know Brian personally, I just am a fan of his work, but he, the initial testing that he's suggesting is that they're from Crimea. So imagine not the last Younger Dryas. Imagine worldwide cymatic polygonal wave frequency based energy, engineered soil, terraforming the planet society that can, how, by the way, do you know, if you can do all that, how do you get anything that lays eggs? You build it on a 3D printer. You make something. You want something to lay an egg, you make it. That's that simple. But yeah. That we don't have any cross planetary fossil. It's like, here's where the baby became an egg maker. It's just, we're not processing that. But the idea is that the Paracas might be from Crimea. So here we are, 50,000, the last flood, this mega flood happens. The Caribbean now looks like the way we see it. Doggerland, like from Ireland and Scotland, Doggerland is still there to even 4,000 years ago. Doggerland is a massive amount of land from Scotland, Ireland, all the way to France. And it would have made the Baltic Sea look like a lake. But definitely over 50,000 years ago, there's a lot of land. And everything goes to crap. And the Paracas, think of them as like Mennonites or Quakers who go, screw this technology. Remember Bill and the whole religious thing. We're going to Peru. We're going to live on the beach. We're going to make textiles. We're going to get high, and we're going to die.
Yep.
And then they just
That's
move.
a life. That's a life.
Well, and so we make this assumption that, again, here's what you can do. You can break out and think of a lot, I think, more solid theories if you just table the facts we're learning versus trying to constantly tie it to a post-flood mythology that we've romanticized, whether it's Greek, Roman, past that, Sumerian, specifically Western versus what we found out. Like, I think you probably looked and saw that I'm hugely excited about that Guatemalan LiDAR scanning that was done a year and a half ago.
I was going to bring that up, about what that found in the Amazon.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, we're
just
60,000 structures, and including hundreds of pyramids that they haven't noticed, and super freeways that are raised. They can even tell through the LiDAR that they were raised freeways so that there would be runoff. And that lines up with some early conquistador stories from the very early 1500s where they got lost and they ended up on a road, and they're like, we looked and it went miles in either direction. We didn't know where we were going. They thought they were lying about it. But what's interesting then is that this society that they found, that the National Geographic it's too exciting not to point out 60,000 structures, right? It's 800 miles of a 5,000 mile LiDAR scan. They're not even done. And at the same time, you have South American archaeologists that said, it used to be when I grew up, based on my age range, everybody came to North America through a land bridge, and they said, oh, it's 5 to 6 million people. And they got all the way to Chile, and they built a crap load of roads and pyramids. And that was just what we saw. And they're like, yep, 5 to 6 million. Now you have archaeologists that are looking at the Guatemalan LiDAR scan saying, we have grossly underestimated the populations in South America. We need to look at South America as possibly a location where societies have started and then moved out from. So how's that for a mind bender? The idea that society started there and left, and they said we can safely, and mind you, this is an archaeologist in an academic system where if they don't say the right things and they don't get published right, if they don't do it the right way, they don't get funding. And I think that's wrong. I think archaeologists need to be paid not to find things. They need to be paid to say what they think and find what they find versus put stuff back in the ground. But they literally said it's 15 to 20 million is the minimum estimate they threw out over a year and a half ago. 15 to 20 million is the minimum now for this South. And they're not talking South. They're talking Central America, Guatemala. They're doing a scan that's like this big, that's going to be this big in a country that's about this big. And we've found 60,000 structures, and they're like, we can safely estimate that there's at least 15 to 20 million. And they're not even done. I think this is why when we go, 8 billion people, we know we could have a whole nother conversation about, we know that there's enough food, there's enough money, there's enough logistics. We could feed everyone on this planet, but it doesn't happen. But could they have had a population based on what we're finding in engineered soil and based on, Gobekli Tepe, we weren't supposed to find, let alone there's 6 more in Turkey, and they're 12,000 years ago. And they're like, again, when you relate to the existing timeline, you end up with a story that says, well, in between all the hunting and gathering, they built this monolithic site, and then they worship things. It was never an Apple store. It was never.
There's a couple things. Like, I know one, they said if you stacked everybody just next to each other, shoulder to shoulder, front to back, everybody, there's no space in between, that the entire world's population will fit inside the state of Texas with room left over.
Actually, I will thank Michael Tellinger for this analogy. He's like, do you know how much room we have on this planet? And we're driving. I'm in South Africa, and we're driving along somewhere, and he goes, think about this. Give every human being an acre. 8 and round it. So let's round it to 8 billion. Give everyone an acre. 2 Texases. You can fit 8 billion people with an acre each. Two Texases, just a little bigger than 2 Texases. That's how empty the planet is. Fine. Then add in roads, and now you're still not far beyond the southern half of Africa. You're not dealing with a lot. We're talking about a significantly empty planet currently. But then then you have to add in dolmens and standing stones and all this weird soil and all these LiDAR scans, and not to dynastic people. So here's the problem. If you've ever been to Mexico or looked at pictures of the pyramids, it has the same personalities as the Egyptians, where you have dynastic people coming in and building a mud brick thing. Yet in the middle, there's a 800, 400 ton basalt megalithic staircase. And you're like, no one I know gets like, hey, you dared me to do this with basalt. I did it. Let's go back to mud brick.
Yeah.
No. No,
Challenge accepted. I did it.
I did it. Let's drink. You owe me. You owe me Hennessy. You owe me cognac till I die.
Oh, okay.
You keep saying LiDAR
Yep.
scans. Can you
I fuck with that.
define that? Because I don't know what a LiDAR scan is.
What was that?
Kid.
What's a LiDAR scan? Is that like a satellite view? Or
Laser.
something?
So yeah, no. So there's two kinds. There's a handheld one that you could do, but this is it's laser. So it's laser.
That's right.
Yeah. And it cuts out all the foliage so they can get now, but Sarah Parkak does the Global Explorer. If you want to do something cool the next time they have a program, she's the one who won the TED Prize about 3 years ago. She's an archaeologist, and she got the bright idea. Well, probably military's been doing it for I know NASA did LiDAR scans over 30 years ago, and they're available if you can work your way through government websiting, but you can actually get their LiDAR scans. But Sarah Parkak used satellite imaging to notice that there was a color difference between sand and the either stones or bricks of buildings, and she used it first in Egypt and found, much to Egyptologists, they weren't thrilled with this. She found at least the foundations to at least 5 pyramids, and you can see that if you look up Global Explorer or Sarah Parkak, and you'll find the images of her pointing at the what it looks like without the scanning and with it, and she found a whole metropolis around just the Giza Plateau, which, by the way, is many square miles. It's not just the 3 pyramids on the hill. But she then won the TED Prize, and they created Global Explorer. So you, as a citizen scientist, can sign up and look at plot maps and help look for either archaeological ruins or maybe illegal digging. And they've been working in South America, and I hope they publish on that. I mean, it's been silent, total radio dark for the last year and a half. But I would hope that there's maybe more publications coming out on that stuff. But LiDAR is it's not everybody has satellite access, right? I know Klaus Donna keeps talking about it, but I do love doing that's a LiDAR scan. So there's probably a crap load of trees and triple canopy.
It's completely covered in jungle, so you wouldn't see this, you just see jungle.
Yeah, so this is from Guatemala. This is one of the National Geographics, and all of this. And what's crazy is this is what's exciting about this is what's left of what possibly was dynastic use by peoples that came in post Younger Dryas, maybe in the last 4,000, 5,000 years. But you can tell from the mounds in the background that there is likely many, many other ruins that may like Teotihuacan down in Mexico. When you see pictures of that from the 1850s, 1860s, it's nothing but the mounds that are in the upper right, left corners.
Oops, sorry.
And then if you look at look at it when they found it, and then look what they turn it into, and it's crazy the differences, because this is unexplored, and this is all lying under canopy that we haven't looked at. So when we find it, look, every corner and bit of human history is cool. I don't want to discount. Those Sengalis that are living on that island, I would love to know their oral traditions. It is incredibly important that we listen to any indigenous and native peoples about their stories, because they are the true histories. They are responsible for areas that we haven't been to, including America. I mean, I think there's enough books out about the Templars, the Vikings, that possibly Dave Brody's new book. It's a fictional book, but based in Romerica. There's plenty of opportunities for many other societies to come here in the last couple. There's amphora off of Brazil. Okay, so I write about that in my book. There is literal we're not talking like one Roman vessel was blown off course. It appears that Brazil was on a trading route with the Roman Empire, and there are amphora, and there's even a history of the Portuguese military there burying what's left of that evidence, because it doesn't go with the narrative. It doesn't go with the Portuguese were the first to Brazil, and you can't talk about that. So we have the Smithsonian doing all their weird stuff and everything else. But now what are you going to do? It's so damn exciting for National Geographic to show We found 60,000 massive buildings, and they could have polygonal masonry. They could have a massive megalithic foundations. But the more we find that hasn't been touched, the more that we find that was forgotten about. Like, look at Machu Picchu. They finished the whole building with like river rock. Like, who does that? You know, the very top, it's all polygonal masonry. And then at the very top, well, the Aztecs, they just plopped some rocks up.
Yeah.
No one who builds like that.
Yeah, it's one of the, you can definitely tell it was worked on afterwards. I mean, we had one of Stephen Myers, we just had him on last week, and it was one of the things we talked about, where we think that my theory is the Egyptians were a secondary society that came across these pyramids, and they went with what they found. His theories on how most likely these were constructed, through like a lock system, floating the blocks into place, makes, for me, made a lot of sense. Because like you said, there's some of these things like the jungles, like they found somebody, I wish I could, like I said, these names fail me. I wish I could describe the names, but they said, think LA and New York City, combine them, that some of these places that they're finding, this is potentially the population that was there, and we're picturing some just jungle tribe, not organized. They're like, no, and that's the part, like, out of your book I really liked, is we're talking modern age, technologically advanced civilizations that were here. We don't know what happened, what died off, but that suddenly they're not there, but their stuff still remains.
Yeah, and so here we have the digression for if you find a piece of it and you create a tradition around it, you have a secret society. If you are the largest established corporate religion in history, you have the Vatican Library, and what doesn't get burned and destroyed by the zealots of the faith are possibly a part of a very subsect of a very small group that knows exactly what they're finding, and they've been finding it. They're very well aware of it. There are rock cut ruins through the Andes, through the mountains, that there's no way the Aztecs built those. They are rock cut. Brian Forrester does some videos on them. You have Eric Von Daniken and Buzz Aldrin coming to look at some of the rock cut crazy underground. You have miners reporting it in South Africa and all over. You have Turkey, you have ruins. We're not talking just basic, it's a stalactited cave and they made their way through it. We're talking very complex underground structures that are showing their face all across the earth that indicate a global society that knew how to live through megalithic disasters, that if you build big. Here's a question I have for you. I point out in my book a redwood called Hyperion, which is also a great sci-fi series, by the way. It's a book series. You should read it. It's really good. But a Hyperion is a tree that they named, that they found in 2008. And you might want to look it up. It's 379 feet tall. And no one noticed it. It's in virgin forest. No one noticed it till 2008. Not the loggers, not anybody. Maybe some indigenous people had it on their radar, but for us, we identified in 2008. But between the sequoia and their granddaddies, the metasequoia and the redwoods, the entire earth, I include a map in my book that shows forests of nothing but these large trees throughout every continent and everywhere. So what we go outside and look at, those are scrubs. These are like, this is mini versions. Imagine a society that can easily move a 1,000, 2,800 ton block, but not just move it thousands or hundreds of miles. And more importantly, you have to think about the technology of the shaping and the polishing and the finishing. So Christopher, that's Hyperion. So now, for everyone,
how could you miss that?
Yeah. Now,
that's
remember,
what I've always wondered.
The trees around it, by the way, this is what blew my mind. The stone, those trees are 100 feet tall. They look like tiny little trees. The tree you're looking at is 379. They have a scaled picture of this tree next to the Statue of Liberty. See if you can pull that up quick, because you should do the scale.
Feet tall.
There you go. So it's 379 feet tall, and
the other one was better.
There's another one. Yeah, that shows from the bottom to the top. But there you go. Like if you go back. So here's the thing: if you are a tree, like, if they're growing trees like this all across the planet, well, some of the things we miss is that when we look at Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo and again all these cymatic polygonal blocks, it's the complexity of the blocks. It's the complexity of the cuts. These are not square cut stones. These have multiple sides. You can't fit a piece of paper between them. Everyone points that out. But what's missing are these finishing materials. How hard is it for a society that can move 1,000-ton block to cut one of these trees and make woodwork like you've never dreamt of? Cut it, shape it, set it on top of these megalithic structures as the foundation to 5 or 10-story buildings. How hard is it? So we're not seeing the finished. We look at the blocks and we're like, well, they have the technology to cut and shape and what appears to be even melt them into place like they're marshmallows and shape them on 10, 8, 15 sides. Like I think the Bolivian dollar has one of them on it. One of the dollars has one of the polygonal stones on it because it's shaped on so many sides. And the complexity of that is not a society that's just, again, hydroponically speaking, and not the ones we're smoking, but the ones that we're using to move lock and dam. That's not, although aeroponics is important, but still the trees are part of a technology of a system that even these scientists that I was mentioning earlier that figured out the stone spheres also took they were not just LiDAR, they were looking at seismic structure settings for Greco-Roman theaters. And they said, we can't help but notice in their thesis and in their studies that the pylons for the Roman amphitheaters and the spheres, they all seem to correlate to earthquake, meaning like Bologna, Italy, all those mysterious towers, they all line up perfectly to create safe zones within the city that you could be in. It just canceled out the earthquake waves, but that's just one piece. The issue is, what are all the technologies to, like the Serapeum? If you want to pull up Christopher Dunn in the Serapeum, it's really interesting to think, how did they build the pyramid? Like, were they doing these lock systems? One of the things that we don't think about in reference to historical remodeling, I do, is that repair work is needed. So if you have a giant energy machine, and I think Christopher Dunn nails it really well, that it's the Giza power plant. It was never a tomb. And the issue is, what happens when it gets hit either by a weaponized scalar, some terrifying scalar punch, or take the Black Knight satellite. Maybe that was a weapons system. Olav Phillips, my publisher, talks about that. That what if the Great Pyramid was hit? How would you repair that structure? And in comes now the father of geopolymers, Dr. Joseph Davidovits. Now, he's still alive. He runs the Geopolymer Institute. He literally is he's won every award the French can give somebody for being a smart scientist. But the guy invented, like, if you have concrete of any kind and it has an accelerant and works in cold or heat or underwater, geopolymers changed the world of concrete. Dr. Joseph Davidovits is it. He is the guy who started it, created it, and had a theory about geopolymers either at Tiwanaku or geopolymers at the pyramid. And the issue isn't what we're always talking about is going, yeah, well, the dynastics didn't build it, then someone built it. Yeah, but it didn't just sit there. We know that from the Sphinx weathering, yeah, live on air. We're not editing that out.
No.
Say it 3 times fast. So the issue is, we know that there is thousands of years of weathering around that enclosure that the Sphinx is in. So now we know that the pyramid has weathering on some of the blockages that were quarried away for other dynastic Egyptian work. So what we don't talk a lot about is the platform that is just around the Great Pyramid. The platform has large, like 800, 900,000 ton cut together, really well-hewn platform. And the pyramid, the Great Pyramid itself, is cut into the foundation of the bedrock. It's like held in place like a peg. It's set in, and that had to be cut. But the reason I bring up geopolymers is because if this thing ran as a power plant way before dynastic times and before Younger Dryas, and possibly maybe it sat around for even longer, but let's just say it ran to the Younger Dryas. If there was a problem and you needed to patch it, you're going to do it with a geopolymer. So what Dr. Joseph David Owitz found, and then was backed up by a Yale archaeologist and an Egyptologist, was that there are geopolymers in use on the pyramid. I don't want to change the dialogue on it. A lot of people are like, well, couldn't they have used geopolymers? Well, I think it's been proven out that there is quite a bit of natural stone. There is quite a bit of stuff that, like the basalt, the hardest stone, copper tools did not do it. There is really complex, really hard, like basalts and rose granites and all sorts of high crystalline stuff that in order to polish and do what they did would have been very complex and needy and difficult. It's not a matter of them just having a water technology to raise or lower a block. The issue is all the complex ancillary technology, because the polygonal exterior, the pyramid has the same nubs on it, and the polygonal locking, they don't just lock up and down and sideways. That's the other problem with lifting these blocks. They go in too. Like you have, of the 3 pyramids that are left, you can see some of the casing stones left at the top, and they're plugged in that way. That's why they're not falling down. They're they're like plugged in like a Lego. They're going this way. But that's just one aspect. So we have to think that these machines and whatever they were in reference to the prior society were maintained, and then they would have repair work. And so geopolymers would be part of that technology. And there's other ancient geopolymers that have been found. And that's the question now, is like, well, that's uncomfortable because, well,
it doesn't fit the narrative.
Yeah, not the narrative, right? Do not look at the man behind the curtain, right? The green curtain.
It's like the forbidden archaeology. Like, before we run out of time, and I've been wanting to bring this up. It's like one of my favorite images. I remember when I first got the book, and I want to say it was the Cretaceous period that they found it, was the seashell with a perfectly laser engraved smiley face.
Oh yeah.
And it's one of those, you find these things all in. You said it, I think, when you were on Nightlight with Mark Eddy and Barbara DeLong, you said the same. You guys are bringing up all these things, and it's one of the biggest things that's always been the problem for me, is we have to get past this part of where if you find something that doesn't fit, it just gets tossed. It just gets thrown away, because it's one of those, like, in investigations. Why is it here? I know it's uncomfortable that I just found a fully armored Roman soldier in the middle, in the Midwest under a cornfield. But we got to kind of ask the question, why is he here?
Yep. And that's the problem. Forbidden archaeology. That's why they ended up putting him on. I mean, Michael Cremo goes to archaeological congresses. If they can't beat him, they made him join. He's become a member, and they're like, well, he makes a lot of good arguments. I mean, good arguments. He's refollowed and investigated on site, in situ, a number of original paleoanthropological finds that show anatomically correct humans in the Red Crag at 3.5 to 5 million years old, at 20 million years old, at Table Mountain in California during the gold rush. They found, again, in situ, not intrusive burial, human findings. And then his big one is Virginia Steen McIntyre, who gets crucified for her. She's a geologist. She's not an anthropologist. She doesn't care about, well, I'm not saying she doesn't care about people's feelings. She knows rocks. It's science. Her whole team says, well, this site, Hueyatlaco, Mexico, in northern Mexico, is 275,000 at a minimum. Modern actual humans, not Neanderthal, not Denisovan, actual humans have a campsite and a bunch of stuff, and it's 275,000 years old. That's just in northern Mexico. There's one for the House of Cards. Now, just that one site, and it's the 60s. She published on it anyway, despite the archaeologists going, don't you understand? This is like, no, there's no one been here except a couple of rock bangers, maybe 26,000, 30,000 years ago. You can't do that. She got crucified. And now it turns out she was right, because now archaeologists have looked at the site again, other geologists, and there's some are saying, realistically, based on the evidence, it could be 500,000 years old. And again, if a benevolent and or indifferent, social media loving, plugged in society of the ancient past may have left 300 tribes alone that they didn't care about. So all along, there can always be tribes, or what we think of as like the Singalis, just people living out the way it goes, it's whatever comes. bark eating and loving it up. And meanwhile, there's the flying saucer that they think is a god. How's that for staying on track?
Very nice. That's I couldn't have asked for you circling around it. That was impressive.
So we got the end. No, not really. So yeah,
No.
it sounds like you've read. You've been reading and looking. Did you like anything else in Forbidden Archaeology? I mean, was there anything else that was because that shell? That's a deep dive. That shell is a huge deal. Again, it's like, oh crap, how do you explain that?
Yeah, because that's one of those things when people are like, well, that's just somebody put that there. There's evidence when they were digging it, they found it. It was there, and it's. It would take me a while to find it in the book to show people the picture, but I mean, it is a perfect laser cut smile face in this seashell, and this is not something that somebody with a Bronze Age tool can chisel away. And there's
ancient
no
Pandora.
flaw.
You shopped at Pandora. Thank you. Collect all the shell trinkets for your bracelets.
Get all the ancient emojis.
Yeah, and then it's LOL, Insta, Snapbook, Paleo Chat. But that find though. Do you know about those they were looking for gold in Siberia, and they found nano parts that are at least 20,000 years old to they think over 200,000. I put those in the book, and the professor in Russia that was looking at those put those on his. They were a high priority, but he died, and now no one's really looking at them. But you can find them. They're gold spiraled springs parts. They were for sure in situ. They were in an area that was at least 20 to 200,000 years old. They could be older. There's an aluminum part that was found under the Mastodon's head, or the woolly mammoth's head in Europe, and it's an aluminum part. At least somebody tried to say it was from a Messerschmitt, and there's no part on a Messerschmitt that looks like this piece of aluminum, and it's machined. So there are quite a few out of place, out of time artifacts like that shell. And again, just because it's natural and somebody concentrated really hard and made a really perfect smiley face. Well, that's undercutting the fact that even in a highly advanced society, they might do something cool with a natural product. That's my point about Hyperion. That's my point about not having nano archaeology in the future is going to be the way to go, because nano archaeology is going to include, well, this looks like a pile of dust, but how often we've had a lot of construction here, and I've taken a lot of photos of, you bust up a road and they're going to recycle the concrete. So the concrete ends up in a big pile. Then it goes down a conveyor, and they literally crush and recrush and crush until there's nothing but a powder left, and they're going to recycle and make more concrete out of the old concrete. And imagine, as mind-blowing as this is, a bunch of nanobots that you send out as we hit a job site to do archaeological work. And those their job is to literally fit all the different crystals together until they build blocks back and eventually know it's a road or is it a building. That's going to be possible with spintronics and with quantum computing. Yeah.
This one, if you can see, it's hard. I'm trying to get the light there. This coin that was found, and can I just say, it was weird. These two pages were stuck together. I don't know what happened here.
Were you holding it this way, or were you holding it this way? Or you had the book open this way?
Yeah, it's like, yeah. So I'm like, why are these pages stuck together? But yeah, it was found. This one was found well boring in Illinois, in an area that would have a layer that would have been 200 to 400,000 years ago. And here's this coin, and so there's no way that a fairly modern, in thousands of year, 1,000-year-old coin is going to find its way in this period. And yeah.
So
it's weird.
Yeah, there is an issue with like the footprints that have been found. There's various footprints all over, including in America, where they're like dinosaur footprints, human footprints. But then there's one that the Rockefeller Foundation looked at. It's a boot print, and it's in stone. I think you can pull it up. They looked, but they didn't know any better. They want to know why a boot print with stitching in the bottom of the sole was found in a hardened piece of stone. Well, it was sandstone or limestone, whatever it is. It's 150 to 200 million years old. It's a footprint, a boot print. Look up 150 million year old boot print. And that one's worth looking at because you can see the stitching lines in it. And
think I got it right here. Unfortunately, it's a small image, but it's
just wafer thin. No,
no,
that's not it. Look
okay,
up. Try a boot print 100. Well, if you say ancient boot print with stitching or something, because it has a heel, and it was looked at because they were like, well, that's odd. But again, it's always a mystery. It's odd. And instead of tabling the narrative, it's the only time. Like, it's ridiculous that the very first organization to hoard knowledge is not our online digital world. It's universities. They've found stuff for, the last hundreds of years. We have thousands and millions of years of human history that are being hoarded in academic settings where they're like, well, look, we have to have a chance to look at it first. And they have ruled up some, that's it right there. And when they zoom in, they've studied it up really close. There's an actual stitching lines. You can see the stitching of the actual boot, and that should not exist. And it's definitely real. And
yeah, it is. Yeah, it's just one of those things. It should, how does something like this occur? And that's one of the, unfortunately, we're running out of time here.
What do we got left?
We got just about 2 or 3 minutes here at most. So I've got to. We'd love to have you back on at some point. To continue this talk.
Yeah.
So we'll get with you and see what's your schedule's looking like down probably like April, May. See what we got available. Try to get you in. Continue because
it sounds like we should have a longer conversation and more drinking because we didn't get very far.
No, I got about halfway. So Solange.
Yeah, the cognac's getting there. Although I got to step it up. Yes. If you're going to bring that kind of top shelf
when I'm bringing the giant tumbler, it's like
that's better. And then I see nothing with Viking. Nothing.
No.
Coffee, tea.
Maybe I cook energy next episode.
Yeah.
But everybody,
this is like my third cup.
Notaliens.com. Go check Jared Murphy out. Go get a signed copy of this book. You're going to love the read. It's not his show, but I'm still going to get him plugged. Michael Cremo, Forbidden Archaeology. We've talked about that book a lot. That's one I've had that for a while, and trust me, if you get it, if you're really into it, between that book, Jared Murphy, you're going to come away with a few questions that you're going to want to ask. And like I always say to a lot of people, you get kind of mad because you're like, why is this stuff hidden from us? Because history is history, but as you get through these things that there's an agenda behind it. You start to question, you also start to put doubt and there's lack of validity in some of the narratives that are being passed to us, and we can't have any questions because once the questions are, then you have to provide answers, and they don't want to do that.
Not at all. Once they say it, that's how it goes.
You lose this.
It's interesting because I do think there's a workaround for that they could actually make money, and I think they could start coming out with all the things that they do have. Like we're the university that put 15,000 unknown prior facts on the table for this new narrative. Like they could actually start pulling the stuff they have already collected. They could actually start owning that they don't know, but owning it in a way that draws people in because everybody wants to do everyone has a hunch. Everyone has that, like Graham Hancock, that we're a species with amnesia. It could be a really fun thing for everyone if they would embrace it. And I think they would make a lot more money if they go the other direction. But that was an awesome quote to leave it on. That was cool. I appreciate that. Well, Jared, thank you so much for coming on the program. I said I hope you had a great time. I definitely did. Yeah, I did. Yeah, it was great meeting you guys. I hope we can do it again. Just send me a text or call me or
I'll definitely shoot you an email either tonight or tomorrow morning, and I'll get that out to you, and we'll see what we can figure out. It's going to be a good time to bring you back in.
Yeah, you guys have a good night.
You too. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Yep.
All right, everybody. This episode was provided by Nanny Cakes here in Central Florida. Nanny Cakes, 407 on Facebook, or give her a call, 407-293-923. How many times?
I can do it for you. 407-923-2898.
Boom.
Yeah. See, there you go, Nanny. You got a celebrity plug right there. You can't. Oh God.
That's
I
right.
swear I try to be a professional, but it doesn't happen.
But she's at facebook.com/nannycakes407 too.
That's right.
That's
Very
amazing.
good. All right, everybody, go to threebeardspodcast.com. Check us out at Patreon /3beardspodcast. Become a beardo. Check us out on all the social media. Like, share, follow us. Get Jared Murphy's information out there to everybody, so that way his book sales go up. We got to try to move him up the chart, on the book sale list. So, everybody, have a great night. Thanks again, Jared. Appreciate it. We will see you guys in a little bit when we talk in the next episode. We're going to be talking about demons and exorcism. So that's quite a deviation from this one. So here we go. All right, everybody. Good night.